Welcome, 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 my lovely brothers and sisters. Welcome, welcome. Welcome today with a new topic. And I'm still reading from the Orion book, volume 2, written by Wes Penry. And the topic for today is nation against nation. And what it exactly means. In the Bible, it is stated in the book of Revelation that one day there will come a moment that nation goes against nation. But what does this in actuality mean? Then we come to the subtitle, also known as En.Ki or En.Ki versus Marduk, and how they are using the human soul group as their cannon fodder and war pawns, because that is what we humans are for them. Marduk and En.Ki do not love us at all. They hate us, and they do everything to kill us off, but to a certain percentage, of course, because they need slaves, they need war pawns, they need cannon fodder. So not too much will be killed, just enough so that they can abuse and misuse and use the rest in their war games between one another. So that is in actuality what is truly going on. So this is also the reason why that I'm doing what I'm doing, because it's about time that we as humans and human soul group start to see through all the lies, deceptions, illusions, deceit, and start to see the things for what they really are. Like the psychological operations, they are nothing more than just distractions, derailments, to fragment the human psyche even more so than they are already doing. All right, it is chapter 9 of this the Orion book, volume 2, Nation Against Nation, also known as En.Ki versus Marduk. Two camps in conflict. Maybe one could say there are two main opinions among researchers about political world conflicts. And know, lovely brothers and sisters, that the elite and oligarchs are nothing more than proxies for En.Ki and one, on the other hand, for Marduk. When it suits them, they interchange. So that is why voting has no use, yeah, because it's all the same. And then Marduk is in play, then En.Ki is in play, and then after a few years they interchange, and then all of a sudden we see more En.Ki at the forefront, and then in other countries we see more the side of Marduk. So voting is nothing more than a cleverly created tool to mislead humans and to make them falsely think that the politicians are there for them and to protect them. But as a matter of fact, lovely brothers and sisters, politicians and politics were never mentioned to be there for humanity in the first place. They were never arranged for that purpose. Politics is nothing more than the stage through which En.Ki and through which Marduk are pushing through their agendas, their war agendas and their singularity agendas, and that's it. So the same with the United Nations. The United Nations is nothing more than an organization, sometimes run by Marduk, sometimes run by En.Ki. It depends on the topic that is being discussed. So the United Nations was never there for humans. We need to wake the heck up and see that non-politician, no organization, no governmental institution, not the entire government structure is there for humans. We are nothing more than their Marduk's or En.Ki's foot soldiers, doormats, cannon fodder, and war pawns, nicely to be used, misused, and to be abused. And also to be used as food because they lack spirit, they lack life force energies, so that is why we see so many children being kidnapped these days because they need food. That is why. So maybe one could say there are two main opinions among researchers about politics and the political world conflicts. So I am talking about political tensions between nations. And boy, oh boy, what do we see? A lot of tension between nations for a long while. And whether it is all for the show, well, of course, there is a show element involved too. My take on this is that it is both about tension and it is for the show. Exactly. Mainly, it is tension, and this tension is that between En.Ki and Marduk. It's the father dash son issues. So again, En.Ki and Marduk both want to be in control of humankind and thus be in control over this real estate, Earth, because Earth is nothing more than just ordinary real estate. And in common Syrian manner. So Marduk fights to take the top position and eventually wants to get rid of his father. This is just common sense because it is Syrian mentality. Syrians do not share power. And Syrians are coming from the star system Sirius. En.Ki might not initially want the competition, but I think Marduk's temperament forces En.Ki to defend and protect himself. This means he wants to get rid of Marduk as well, or the two will need to fight things out in the Ka, which is the spiritual universe. So, however, if their cosmic troops are not united, the chances are less they will be victors in a future cosmic war. Both En.Ki and Marduk want the singularity because it is in their sick-minded, psychopathic, sociopathic mind the only way for the overlords to get out of here. Yeah? But they both want it on their terms and conditions, of course. And we need to remember that Marduk is the Khan.us, Khan.ur, or better known as mentioned in the Bible, the King of Kings. Yeah, so now we get to understand if the Bible is speaking about the King of Kings, it refers to Marduk. Among Syrians, he can never afford to be weak. If he shows any kind of vulnerability, other Syrians notice it and they see an opportunity to overthrow him and take his place, because there are many in line waiting for that position. They will kill Marduk and a new Khan.us Kam.ur will succeed him. Enki has the advantage of being the scientist able to use Orion technology in his favor. And the real name of Orion is Ari An. An means heaven. But he is also handicapped being in the lowest of the realms, with no chance to get out without, here it comes, humanity's help. But first, he needs to gain humanity's trust. So, what Enki is doing, he is luring into a plan that we human souls, and thus the human soul group, needs to save their abuser, punisher, and killer. How ridiculous does that sound? But first, he needs to gain humanity's trust, i.e., he must continue making us think like him. So, Enki is more and more luring the minds of humans into his mind so that eventually you can say there is a shared fantasy going on, which happens in a narcissistic relation too. The longer you are in a narcissistic relationship, the chances are there that you eventually are being sucked into the mindset of the narcissist and become, in thinking and doing, also like the narcissist. And this is in actuality going on with the entire human soul group. So that is why it is of importance to get yourselves informed and educated about narcissism, sociopathy, psychopathy, malignant narcissism, and Machiavellism, because then you get the deeper understanding why we see such an expansion of narcissism, sociopathy, and psychopathy in society. Because the majority of the beautiful human souls are completely unawares that they, over a long period of time, have more and more being sucked into this narcissistic, schizophrenic, sociopathic, psychopathic mindset of Enki. And so we are in a situation which is known as shared fantasy. Um, so with this said, we become more and more like Enki himself. Well, that suits Enki very much because then we are easily to manipulate and to be controlled. That is the main reason. That is why a narcissist is doing everything to suck its supply, the mind of its supply, into his own mind, because then they can easily manipulate their partner slash supply and also can easily control them. Then he can merge with our minds and write our avatar. So this is also one of the reasons why he is doing what he's doing, because he wants to have control over our mind so that he can use our avatars, which are already active in the metaverse and thus in the singularity timeline. So this is the reason why you need to wake up and decide for yourselves, do you want to be still connected with the singularity timeline, also known as metaverse timeline? Yeah? If not, get the heck out of there, get your ass out of there, get your soul fires out of there, and have yourselves completely disconnected from it and choose another timeline. The more people start to do this, the more difficult it becomes for these schizophrenic warlords. Yeah, this Enki and Marduk. And for us to vibrate as similarly to him as possible, we must come to him because he cannot come to us. And mind you, that Enki is presenting himself in the Bible as God the Father. Yeah? So, wow, this should make some thinking in your mind. Why is it that God is asking from um, us to come to Him? That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Thus, the part of the elites who and oligarchs and each and every being that is related to Enki's bloodline, um, who support him, does all they can to lower the frequency of the human soul group as we speak. I ask you to please go to the video about the global traumatization, because that is indeed what is going on. That is what the elites and oligarchs and their cohorts are doing. They are constantly creating situations to traumatize the human souls 24/7 a day, so that we are becoming more and more and more fragmented, just as what is happening in the MK Ultra programming. Lovely brothers and sisters, MK Ultra is being played upon us. Yeah, it's not anymore for just a few people or something. MK Ultra is worldwide. We are in a gigantic MK Ultra setting. We are being traumatized each and every day. Why? So that our souls become more fragmented. And fragmentation means the creation of other personalities. That is why this marketing machine is using word sorcery. You are constantly dealing with word sorcery. The overlords, yeah, the ones who control this world, this matrix, are using word sorcery on daily basis, and they use specific words to trigger certain parts in us. And these parts are more obedient to their agendas. This is how it works. But if you do not inform nor educate yourselves about the basic principles of MK Ultra, you do not see this, and you do not understand this whole structure that they are doing on daily basis to the human soul group, to us. Thus, the part of the elites who support him does all they can to lower the frequencies of the human soul group as we speak. Marduk is doing the same because he also needs the human soul group to vibrate lower. So there's a pulling done by both of them. Marduk has the advantage of being on site, and he can manipulate matters more freely on the Earth's surface, having personal encounters with his team. Yeah, with his team means the oligarchs and the elite people and their cohorts. Yeah, his handicap, however, is his lack of scientific knowledge. Thankfully, that is his handicap. Um, so he must trust his own elite scientists who learn from studying En.Ki's technology in the order it is released upon this world. This means Marduk is technologically usually one step behind. One of Marduk's innate strengths is his conquest skills. As a Syrian, this is his specialty. Therefore, he is exactly where he needs to be. He is on earth, where things happen. Here he can be the perfect strategist. He can instruct his generals face to face and give appropriate orders. So, whom are they meeting in these dark rituals? Well, could it be Marduk? And could it be that then Marduk is behind the entire military machine in the world, especially the United States military machine? Um, so En.Ki does not have that privilege from the place he is at. He must delegate the tasks remotely through his human minions. To us humans, it matters not who of these two gods is the victor. Either way, we lose unless we can get out of here. A bleaker option would be that we humans get together as a soul group and finally say no to this insanity, and then as a entire human soul group are crying out to the Orion Council. After that, Orion is then able to come and help us. They cannot do this just based on an individual crying. The whole human soul group needs to stand as a group and say no and cry aloud to the Orion Council. And then the Orion Council says, okay, all humans on earth are asking our help, and we shall come and give our help to them. But they cannot do this because they do not interfere with our free will. That's the whole point. This whole free will thing is nice, but in some cases, not so handy. And in this case, you can say, is free will handy? Because waiting till the entire human soul group or a huge percentage of the human soul group is ready to say no and stand as a group and cry aloud to the Orion Council, that can take a long while. So, heeding our unified call for help. So then, after that, Orion can come, heeding our unified call for help. I see no signs that this is going to happen, neither do I. Though, and neither did my Orion source. No. Why? Because the majority of, unfortunately, the majority of the human souls are already in um, are already so deeply pulled into the mindset, and thus this shared fantasy of En.Ki, it starts to become very difficult for them to get loose. But nothing is impossible. You still can get yourselves disconnected from this whole En.Ki mind. Where there is a will, there is an opportunity and also a solution. En.Ki versus Marduk support us among nations. If there are two factions of world nations, sometimes working together and sometimes fighting each other, so it's constantly going along, how do we know who is who? Which nations work for En.Ki and which ones for Marduk? Once we get an insight into this, it becomes easier to understand why certain nations invade each other and why other nations are eager to overthrow dictators or monarchs. So this is why I am doing this topic today, because we need to see this. Ruffling their feathers in territories where they do not belong. By understanding the following concept, we also understand there is a deeper agenda behind invasions. Yes, there is. Assassinations of political leaders and other shocking events leading to something else that benefits either side and sometimes both sides of the covert battle between the gods. As usual, it is we regular humans way down on the totem pole who must do the dirty work. We are En.Ki's and Marduk's pawns and cannon fodder on the battlefield. We are the ones they sent to war under false promises, killing and dying for the criminal overlords, and thus killing and dying in the name of Marduk and in the name of En.Ki / God the Father of the Bible. regardless of which side we are fighting on. We are the cannon fodder. In the meantime, our leaders sit safely in their offices, usually making sure their sons and their daughters do not go into war. Of course not, because they are the bloodlines of or En.Ki or Marduk. During the Westbury paper years, I was discussing this matter with the Orion source. I was told the monarchies of the world work for En.Ki. All right. The late Queen Elizabeth II, for example, thought she was Orion's representative on Earth. How familiar. Does the Pope not think the same? He thinks that he is the representative for God, the God of the Bible. Yeah? So that is an interesting thing here. When she was nothing of the sort. Remember, En.Ki is also from Orion. The monarchs, the queens, and the kings are En.Ki's pure bloodline, i.e., the Noah bloodline of Osiris and Isis. And Osiris, En.Ki was also Osiris. This is important to remember as we continue through this chapter. Therefore, we can see or trace nations supporting En.Ki. Another good indicator is to notice in what countries nanotechnology is the most innovative or innovative. Those are usually En.Ki nations. There is, however, a caveat to this. Nations invade each other, overthrow leaders, and take over. So a nation that was once a monarchy under En.Ki's banner can change ownership overnight and become Marduk's domain, turning into a dictatorship or some other kind of political structure, and vice versa. A typical example of this is Russia, which once was ruled by a Tsar, which was En.Ki's bloodline, and thus they belonged as a clan to En.Ki, backed up by secret societies which always work behind the scenes. Vladimir Lenin came around, and after him, the demonic Joseph Stalin. The Soviet Union obviously made Tsar Russia into Marduk's domain. So now, lovely brothers and sisters, you get a deeper understanding of the scenery behind Russia Ukraine. So now you get to ask yourself the question, the nation Ukraine, under whose rulership are the leaders? En.Ki's? Or yes, because if you now know that Russia is in actuality more Marduk's domain, then Ukraine shall be more En.Ki's domain. After that came Mikhail Gorbachev, then Boris Yeltsin, and eventually Vladimir Putin, former KGB. Although the Soviet Union is gone, it is still Marduk. Yeah? So you can say that this Putin guy is doing the bidding of Marduk. The US of A, the United States of America, is the domain of En.Ki. Now we come to this closing point that America will be the new Atlantis, because the second Atlantis was under rulership of En.Ki. So now we get to know and understand why the things are happening in the United States of America. as they are happening because they are trying to set up a third Atlantis under the rulership of Enki. Thus, the constant tension between these nations. How can the US be Enki's? It is a republic. Well, supposedly, they have fooled us so many times and lied to us so many times, and they have set up a very clever construct to make us believe all sorts of things, but in actuality, everything is one gigantic lie and not a monarchy. Well, somewhere in the deep background, the United States is a monarchy, and they are still under the English banner. So still the English crown in a certain way. Um, so the US, as well as Canada and Australia and New Zealand and others, are monarchies, exactly, run by the British Crown. It is not commonly acknowledged, of course, but besides that it is irrefutable, it is easy to see that the entire North America is under the influence of the British Crown. Canada even used to have letter stamps portraying the Queen of England. Contrary to what most people think, the USA has never been independent. Never. It is an extension of Old England. The War of Independence was just a farce, a make-up, a show, theater. And if you know that the inhabitants of America are in actuality refugees from Europe, then everything makes sense that it is still British Crown and an extension of Old England. A game played by secret societies, particularly Freemasonry, to create a second Atlantis, i.e., a technocratic society. Now you get the understanding why the majority of German physicists and so on after the Second World War came to America. Yeah? Leading toward the singularity. Sir Francis Bacon, the Rosicrucian, Freemason, and En.Ki supporter at the court of Queen Elizabeth I, wrote about this in detail already in the 1600s. So look up yourselves on the internet. Sir Francis Bacon and 1600s agenda. But people still want to believe that the American Revolution and the Constitution are in our favor. No, because what I said before, the entire political body was never there for humans. So they are not sitting there for protecting the people of the nations. No, they are sitting there to do the bidding of Marduk or do the bidding of En.Ki. Um, but people still want to believe that the American Revolution and the Constitution are in our favor. History repeats itself, of course. The USA has never been about people's freedom. No country in the world is about people's freedom. So what the United Nations did was quite cleverly to keep people further asleep with this Declaration of Human Rights and this Declaration of Children's Rights, because if we look around us, these two declarations are not honored in any way, shape, or form. Because if that was the case, can you then please tell me why we see so many refugees on the streets, homeless people, and so on, so on? Why do we still see so many poverty in the world? If the United Nations in 1949 claimed that they would be there to solve all these issues for humans, no, they're not there for us. And we have seen this in 2020 with the rollout of this pandemic circus all over the world. And this whole one script that was being rolled out and played out. Although some founding fathers, not being Freemasons, might have been led to believe so. It was supposed to be and is an experiment in technology, so Enki can continue where he left off at the end of the Atlantis era, when he was interrupted by the Orion instigated deluge. So now we see that we are reliving the entire history. But because of the fact that the human souls are being recycled, history can repeat itself all over again and again and again and again. It all has to do because of the fact these overlords are taking away our memories. They are wipe cleaning our memory bank, and because of the soul recycling that each and every human soul and animal soul goes through, um, and when we are being shut back in a meat body, they make sure that we have amnesia and do not remember anything anymore. So now we get to understand why people do not learn from their mistakes. It is not from our side deliberately done that we do not learn from our mistakes. It is because we are constantly being recycled, our minds are being wiped cleaned, and um, we also have been brought in a deliberate state of amnesia. Dictators and presidents run South America and are therefore Marduk's domain. Haiti, Mexico, and Brazil used to be monarchies but are now republics. China has the technology, so it should be En.Ki's domain, right? Well, it is not, it is Marduk's clan. So now you get to understand why there's a huge level of cruelty also going on in China, which of course the mainstream media is not reporting about. However, China was once a monarchy but was taken over. The country is now being used as one of Marduk's technology centers. So now we get to understand why China is more and more taking over the world, because Marduk is trying to take over the world. Yes? All right. The country is now being used as one of Marduk's technology centers, and he and his scientists learn more and more about En.Ki's Orion technology. So this is, of course, not in our favoritism at all. So we need to wake the heck up. And we need to take our sovereignty back. We need to stand on our own feet, and we need to stop being dependent on things outside ourselves, such as the Bible, such as the false gods, such as the so-called God of the Father who is proclaimed in the Bible. Japan is also En.Ki's domain, and they are not in alliance with Russia. Or better said, Japan is En.Ki's domain and they are not in alliance with Russia. But what about World War II? Pearl Harbor and the American attack on Japan. Should the USA and Japan not be on the same side? Yes, but neither En.Ki nor Marduk care about the life of people. Neither En.Ki nor Marduk cares about human life. Have that in your mind. Neither En.Ki nor Marduk do care about human life. They do not even care about nature, about animal life, about life at all. They don't care about a darn thing about it. So wake the heck up and stop voting on all these idiots that call themselves politicians, whom are not nothing more than just proxies for or Marduk or En.Ki. We are just tools for them to achieve a goal. The Japanese American conflict in World War II was just convenient for future agendas. The US government knew about the attack on Pearl Harbor before it happened, but did deliberately nothing, which is very similar to 9/11. They knew about all this, but they deliberately did nothing. And they deliberately set up a false narrative and created a deliberately uh, false facade, decor, or stage around this whole 9/11 too. Of course, the US and Russia have almost always conflicted with each other, and there has been constant competition between the two. Although sometimes they also work together, the companionship between them is real as well as the antagonism. As mentioned earlier, both En.Ki and Marduk want singularity on their terms happening, respectively, but sometimes they need to come together on terms they both must agree with. We also notice that in general, most Western societies are En.Ki's domain. So this means that we can say that the European Union is En.Ki's domain and that many European countries are En.Ki's domain. And the Eastern Bloc is Marduk. So now you get to understand the whole conflicts in Israel and so on and everything that is happening in the Middle East. Russia is in cahoots with China and North Korea, and they are expanding their alliance to include most countries in that part of the world. So they are trying to confiscate country after country to become a big alliance. Sounds like a big group of war soldiers. Yeah? Using these tools and this knowledge of who is who in politics, we can more easily trace the global intrigues, interests, and conflicts. And thus, through this, we also can see whom is behind the whole World Economic Forum agendas and the so-called green agendas. All these green agendas are there to push the humans into the singularity timeline and thus into metaverse. That is the main sinister, dark, and evil reason behind all these green agendas. It is nothing more than just an attempt to enforce as many as possible human souls into the singularity timeline and thus into metaverse. Yeah, which is in actuality the forever prison for the human soul. We can also better understand why they happen and who is who. Still, we need to keep in mind that nations are invaded. Coups happen and the opposite sides takes over. Thus, we have revolutions, world wars, and other devastating events that change directions in world politics. Nations even attack themselves or allow an invasion of their country to change things around, such as with 9/11, which was obviously staged. Another good example of En.Ki's versus Marduk's team is Elon Musk versus Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. Musk is presenting technology, telling us we cannot stop the singularity from happening, but we can make it better than what some people want it to be. Musk works for En.Ki. And so Schwab works for Marduk. So now we get the understanding that the entire World Economic Forum is the domain of Marduk. So this is the reason why I'm handing you over this information. I'm not sitting here for my own benefit, totally not. I'm sitting here to help you, to help my lovely fellow human brothers and sisters whom are about to go into something of which the majority is completely unawares of in what they are entering into. And I think it's my duty to pass on this information. The more people would do such a thing, the more we help each other. And that is all what we have to do, helping each other. Musk works for En.Ki. He produces the implants, the Starlink, the satellites, and so on. And on that level, Marduk is coming along because he wants this too. Schwab is the non-technological guy. He is the finance guy, just like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Mellons, the Carnegies, the Kellogg's, and so on, and the Warburgs. They are all supporting Marduk. Facebook and Zuckerberg are technology. They and Bill Gates are En.Ki's people. The same thing goes for NATO, supported by En.Ki nations. So now we need to understand why NATO is not there for our protection. No, NATO has become a war machine. Yeah, they are instigating wars. They are instigating revolutions. They are not there to protect the people. They never were there for the people. They were never made as such for the people. Never. And not supported by Russia and the East. So now you get the deeper understanding why NATO all of a sudden finds it their duty to fight against Russia. Yeah, because they are supporting En.Ki, and En.Ki has told them, you need to make war with Russia, you need to make war with Marduk. The Scandinavian countries are also En.Ki. They are all monarchies except Finland, which is a republic but has been under Swedish monarchical occupation in the past. Africa mostly is Marduk, except perhaps for Lesotho and Swaziland, which are monarchies. It is interesting to research the treaties between countries. We can easily see which nations are En.Ki's territory and which nations are following Marduk's policies. All right. This is quite a chapter, so I will do this chapter in two parts. So let us discuss this whole Adolf Hitler and the Aryan race. Okay, let's talk about World War II. Based on what we just uncovered, was Nazi Germany En.Ki's or Marduk's project? It would be Marduk with a charismatic dictator, Adolf Hitler as the puppet leader. How many who have read the West Penry papers ever wondered why Hitler wanted to create a Aryan race? The Aryan race is the name of the entire humankind. We are Aryans, better known as Orions. The human soul group, each and every human soul is an Orion soul. The human soul group is an Orion soul group, so to say. We are Orions or Aryans. All of us who belong to the original spirit group on Tiamat. So, what was Hitler after? Why did he choose the so called blonde, between quotation marks, Scandinavian race as a prototype for the future superhuman? Well, it was not because Hitler was confused. He knew what he was doing. He was Marduk's puppet, and his task was to help his master to create, or rather maintain, an, here it comes, archontic bloodline for the Aryan human soul group to incarnate into soon. Wow, this is interesting. Um, After Germany had won the so-called war, purer bloodlines, purer from an archontic perspective seen, are always easier to control than those that are heavily mixed and diluted, which most bloodlines are these days. The Scandinavians are mainly of the Marduk Ereshkigal bloodline. Ereshkigal, also known as the goddess of the underworld. And in the 1900s, the Scandinavian bloodlines have become quite archontic. For more information, see my book, The Story of Isis and the War on Bloodlines. It's an interesting book. I'm reading it too. As well as the book of Isis is also the story about Isis. Please read that book too, because it also is telling us about the incarnation of Isis in Princess Diana. So Princess Diana was in actuality the incarnation of Isis. So that is why there were a lot of Isis symbolisms around her and around her death. The battle between father and son to get full control over the singularity is all about bloodlines. This is very important to understand, because this is why all these wars and conflicts never seem to make perfect sense. Yet they do. If we think in terms of bloodlines, between brackets, the seed lines of the gods, it makes perfect sense and fills in the gaps. So bear with me for a while and I will explain. The excellent book, The Spear of Destiny by Trevor Ravenscroft, tells the story of Hitler and his connection with the superhuman race living underground, between brackets, the overlords dash the actual power behind Hitler. He told the upper echelon of the Nazi party he had met them, and he was afraid. They were terrifying. He was apparently shaking when he said it. It was these overlords who told Hitler which race they wanted to breed. As we just discussed, the what is called Scandinavian race is the Marduk Ereshkigal seed line. So Marduk is popping up here again. Obviously, Marduk wanted his own seed line to be the seed line in the forefront. I would argue that he wanted to end the En.Ki ISIS bloodline. Of course, he wants to end this, because the more of the En.Ki ISIS bloodline are dying off, the better grip Marduk and his bloodlines have. And I can then guarantee you, well, we are already experiencing a very um, uh, tyrannical world, but the level of tyranny then will increase tremendously when Marduk succeeds to rule this world. So I would argue that he wanted to end the Enki Isis bloodline in favor of his own, but to confuse the matter some more, Marduk wanting to keep the Marduk Ereshkigal seed line was a last resort, a matter of getting more in control of the human genome in preparation for the singularity. So, the way our genome had developed over time, Marduk apparently thought it was a better option to create his own archontic bloodline together with Ereshkigal instead of with Isis. This way, he also thought he could claim us through our much purer, and here it comes, archontic DNA. We have these buggers in our DNA. This was planned for obvious reasons. First, it would make En.Ki weaker because he could no longer manipulate his bloodline remotely if it was ended. Therefore, Marduk wanted and still wants to destroy the En.Ki Isis bloodline as much as possible. Second, Marduk wants his own bloodline as pure as possible to enter the singularity, which means he, through DNA, can more easily manipulate this seed line because his own DNA is within them. So Hitler called Germany the fatherland, and that Germans were superior to others. He also mocked the mother goddess by using an inverted swastika as the Nazi symbol. We need to see that symbols in actuality in their main um, use are most of the time related to the mother goddess. And by misusing symbols, um, in actuality, then it is mockery against the mother goddess. So the swastika is originally a symbol for the Orion Queen. The overlords spread the lie about Germans being a superior race, and Hitler knew it. From the overlords' perspective, the Germans were just useful idiots, prepared to go to the slaughterhouse, ending up like the executed Jews. And here I'm going to revert to you to the video still available on YouTube, which is called Hellstorm. Please watch this because then you get a very deep understanding what has happened to the German people in the Second World War. This documentary was for some years off the internet, and thankfully someone else put it again on YouTube. So find it and watch this documentary. They always talk about the what has happened to the Jews, but they never ever talk about what has happened also to the German people. Mar and ending up like the executed Jews. So Marduk's intention, according to the Orion source, was to sacrifice, here it comes, to sacrifice the entire German people to the gods, as well as to sacrifice all the Jews to the gods. Do you now wake up and see the connectional dots, what is happening in the Middle East? That it's nothing more than in actuality a theater to create sacrifices? Also, there's more at stake and in play than the mainstream media is giving to us. Um, German people to the gods, they were not the chosen ones. There was no such thing as chosen ones, in as a matter of fact. This also makes sense taking into consideration what happened during the war and particularly at the end. Hitler sent Germans to war where many died, but then he made the unfathomable mistake, so called mistake, to invade Russia. Of course, it was not a mistake. He was told to go on war with Marduk's nation. So to go on war with Russia was not a mistake, that was deliberately done so that the other nations had an excuse to bombard the entire um, German population and to destroy, in many cases, Germany as nation. To invade Russia in the middle of the merciless Russian winter. There is a lot to say about Hitler, but he was not stupid. So, why did he invade Russia? He sent millions of troops to freeze to death on the Russian tundra. That was the beginning of the major sacrifice that Marduk, through his marionette Hitler, had planned, that would feed Marduk and his Syrian allies with immense quantities of soul energies known as lush. He failed in his plans, fortunately, because soon enough Berlin was attacked and occupied by the Allies, and Hitler fled and ended his days in Argentina, of which there is enough evidence to presume this is true. There are indeed also post-mortem pictures of Hitler, if genuine, because in that day and age, Photoshop was also already on the stage. Many things have been photoshopped by then also. Where he appears to be in his 80s or 90s. It certainly looks like him, but we know Photoshop can do a lot. There are also Argentinians who have been interviewed confirming Hitler lived there after the war. Those who invaded Berlin were, of course, En.Ki supporters, the so-called allies, except Russia, which was Marduk's domain. Now, wait a minute, you might say, if that is the case, why were Germany and Russia enemies? And why did Russia help the allies to defeat Germany, if they were both Marduk countries? Stalin was in on eliminating Germans because Marduk ordered him to do so. The Germans were supposed to be eliminated from the beginning, and Stalin was a part of making that happen. So was Hitler. The two worked together behind the scenes for the most part, and they were both working for Marduk. The reason why Marduk did not want the German bloodline for his future convenience is probably because the German seed line is that of Marduk Rashkagal. Marduk wanted to keep the purer Marduk Isis bloodline intact, which in this case is the Russian seed line. See chapter 1 for more about the different seed lines. The Marduk-Ereshkigal line was always a last resort. If we look at the former Soviet Union and today's Russia, there is very little mixing between races in Russia. Russia is for what is stated Russians. They are of Marduk Isis seed line. The purer the bloodline, the easier it is for Marduk to control it. So this makes you also think, why is it that you have the urge to migrate to a certain country? Could it be that it is because of genetics that you are carrying a specific group of seed line in you that is forcing you to migrate to a certain country? Let's think about that. That's an interesting one to ponder upon. We also must remember that the black Africans are the original En.Ki ISIS seed line starting with Ham after the flood. And Hitler was big on terminating black people too. More about the black people later in this chapter. However, not all Africans were black, and if we investigate the monarchs of the world, we will probably find a mix of black people with some other races. Okay. Or non-black people whose ancestors migrated from northern Africa a long time ago, all of them with a significant amount of the En.Ki ISIS seed line in them. So Hitler's task was not to win the war, it was apparently to destroy the En.Ki ISIS bloodline together with the Marduk Ereshkigal bloodline in favor of the Marduk ISIS bloodline. If Hitler had succeeded, Marduk would be on top of his game as the only one in control of a relatively pure bloodline. But he never got to complete his task. The Allies intervened and many Germans survived the war, as we know, although severely reduced in numbers. Nazi Germany was obviously a step in the direction for Marduk to create his own singularity, eventually excluding En.Ki from the equation. The German people and the German soldiers were used as cannon fodder. The Germans were known to be very good soldiers, and the country was strategically positioned to fight against the Allies. Marduk had always had the disadvantage of not having access to Orion technology. However, by the time just before the Second World War, he had managed to, what is known as, breed a team of scientists that could help him proceed En.Ki's plans. One of them was Joseph Mengele and Werner von Braun, or so he thought. He failed, and En.Ki won the war. Many Nazi leaders were suicided and others were executed, but the US smuggled the best Nazi scientists to America in Operation Paperclip, and these brilliant minds were now working with En.Ki, so the war greatly improved. So now you get to understand also the scenery behind NASA. To who belongs NASA? Well, if you know that Werner von Braun eventually start working for En.Ki, then we can say NASA is the domain of En.Ki, and CERN could be the domain of Marduk. And these brilliant minds were now working with En.Ki, so the war greatly improved En.Ki's chances of winning the race toward the singularity. But even Hitler and his brilliant Nazi elite were stupid in some ways, because if Nazi Germany had won the war, they too would have been sacrificed together with the rest of the German people. Of course, they were just nothing more than handy proxies. This was something they apparently never took into consideration. Regardless of our position as humans, we are just tools for the overlords to be discarded when we are no longer needed. We are the malignant narcissists, objects to them. It seems to me that En.Ki is primarily a malignant narcissist with many antisocial, psychopathic, and sociopathic traits. And Marduk is a full-blown psychopath at heart, if he has one. Well, I think Marduk has no heart at all in that sense. And with this said, I have come to the end of reading the first pages of this quite long chapter 9 of the Orion book, volume 2. Tomorrow or maybe later on this day, I will continue with the second part. Let all the information that you have heard this morning sink into your mind, ponder upon it, and buy the books yourselves so that you can read this information yourself. And see all the websites mentioned in the text box, go through them, and go through the West Penry website, westpenryvideos.com. There's a whole archive of information there. Please go through it and start to educate and inform yourselves. Now it is still available because we do not know when the internet can be off. Yeah. And so please inform yourselves, educate yourselves. Now it is still possible. It is needed that we start to see the things for what they truly are. All right. And we need also to see through all the lies, and we need to acknowledge that we are being used as cannon fodder, as foot soldiers, as war pawns, and a doormat for these two gods. Yes, Enki and or Marduk, depends on the project, so to speak. All right. Again, thank you so much, and I leave you with a short piece of music called Hope, and it's created by Ben Sound. See you next, and have a joyful, wonderful day filled with a lot of information, truth, revelations, knowledge, and love. See you next time.